Hey class, this is a lecture for 352B. Uh, I haven't talked to you guys in a long time, and uh, I'm happy to talk to you now. I hope everybody's doing all right. This stay at home, not quite a lockdown situation that we have here in Illinois, it's a serious thing. Um, as this virus is starting to dig deeper into the country, it's clear that it's really causing some, major devastation. And I just really have to emphasize that we need to be safe. I mean, obviously, the goal of this class is to teach you all African history. I'm going to do that. Now, obviously, uh, things are proceeding much differently than they would have uh, if we had not had to end traditional classroom education. But there's still a lot we can achieve this semester. Now, today I want to talk about the stuff that I assigned you for last week, chapters 23 to 25. Now, these chapters deal with the process of colonization and also heading up to World War II. Now, really, one of the things that is really important to stress about the period of colonization is that it's actually a pretty short period. I remember one time I saw a professor, a very famous professor, anthropologist. I cannot remember his name right now, but he's originally from Kenya, from guy Swahili extraction from Kenya. Ali Mazrui, that's his name. I actually met him one time at a conference. But I remember Ali Mazrui made the point that for much of Africa, the colonial period was shorter than a human lifetime. A lot of places uh, were colonized in the 1880s, uh, and colonization largely ended by 1960, 1966. I mean, most of the countries in Africa had gained independence by that time. The exceptions were the Portuguese territories of Guinea-Bissau, Angola, and Mozambique, and also, of course, Southwest Africa and South Africa. Uh, they stayed colonized much longer. But the great majority of Africa uh, was formally colonized for about 75 to 80 years, 75 to 81 years, which, that's a long time, but a lot of people live longer than that. And so, in absolute terms, it was a relatively short period of time. Now, the thing to understand is that European colonization, uh, it kind of gradually developed over the time. Like I talked earlier about how, in the coastal areas, there had been a European presence in many places for a long time. And, in South Africa, of course, because of the long-standing European colonization, there was a much more developed European population and developed level of European exploitation of the African economy. Uh, but in other places, it developed, pretty gradually, although it did step up, from the mid 19th century onward, especially places like the Congo Free State. But the actual process of colonization was pretty quick, and that was largely because once the Europeans made up their mind they wanted to colonize, by that time they had developed the military superiority that allowed them to go in and defeat people pretty quickly. Things like the Maxim gun, things like modern artillery. And also the fact that Europeans, had the Berlin Conference and were coordinated among themselves. Europeans had decided that they were going to stick together so that they could colonize Africa. And, with the sole exception of Ethiopia, where King Menelik II was able to get British help and in order to fight the Italians, uh, Africans were not able to get any European assistance. I mean, and so therefore that meant that Africans were locked out of access to the latest weaponry, which ultimately meant that they were going to be defeated pretty handily whenever they came into direct military conflict with Europeans. I mean, if you look at places like the Battle of Umdurman in what nowadays is the Republic of Sudan, the British, and in that particular situation, they killed tens of thousands of Sudanese, and they lost like maybe I think maybe like 200 people. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but it was extremely lopsided. And so, as Shillington mentions, this really created a sense of really a profound superiority among Europeans and also among Africans. It gave them a significant sense of really being the underdogs. A sense of inferiority, of having totally been overwhelmed in their own country by small numbers of foreigners. And remember, these were small European armies. By and large, Europeans were able to come into Africa with relatively small European armies, and what they were able to do, they were able to recruit African mercenaries in most cases to fight against other Africans. There were some exceptions to this, especially like in Namibia, where you had much larger numbers of European troops. Uh, and this really brings up an interesting thing, and this is something I mentioned in class before, and that is that Africans did not see themselves as Africans. They did not think of Africa as a continent. They did not see Africa as a place where they were all connected. People saw themselves as members of their communities. Like in Things Fall Apart. Okonkwo thought of himself as a man from Umofia. He thought about the seven villages. That was his world. Okonkwo probably didn't know anything about people in northern Nigeria, people in western Nigeria, and they would have been completely total strangers and foreigners to him. And if somebody like Okonkwo, had not directly resisted the British and had joined the British Army, he would not have had any problem going to a place like Sokoto or to a place like Kano or Abuja. I don't know if he really had Abuja at that time, but or like say the Jos Plateau in middle Nigeria. He wouldn't have had a problem going up there and just leveling folks, because those people would have been foreigners. I mean, the white folks would have been foreigners who looked different, but these other Africans would have been foreigners too. And so this basic sense of not seeing a unified Africa really worked to the advantage of European colonists. And this is not a phenomenon completely unique to Africa. India had a very similar dynamic. Because of the caste system, because of the many different ethnic groups, because of different religious practices, South Asian people did not particularly feel a sense of unity, which was why first the British East India Company and later the British government was able to effectively rule hundreds of millions of people. A colony, with a population, probably 40, 50 times that of Britain, because these people did not have a sense of unity. They were allied, in caste group or religious group or ethnicity, and so that allowed them to be exploited militarily by their colonizers. And so, like I say, you see this dynamic in Africa. Now, really, the interesting thing about it is that looking back, it's easy to see that direct colonization of Africa really had a pretty weak foundation. And the thing that really exposed this was World War One. World War One was a conflict that had been developing for a long time uh, in Europe. I mean, this was a byproduct of the whole philosophy of realpolitik that some of you all who've taken Western Civ or maybe some other European classes have heard about. And this was pretty much a political philosophy in which Europeans, really saw war as another method of achieving goals, and as a result, they made very little to actually avoid conflict. And there were two things really driving World War One. One was the sense of nationalism in Europe itself. You had many ethnic groups who felt that they deserved a nation state. There were many people with countries who felt that they had what they referred to as irredentist territories. These were territories that historically had been dominated by the ethnic group that were outside of their country. And so, therefore, you have many, many different people in Europe who were unhappy with the map of Europe and who wanted to claim territory that they did not currently control. But in addition to this nationalism within inside Europe itself, there was also a very strong competition for colonial territories, in particular in Africa. And what we see is that the Germans, in particular, who were the new guys in Africa, the Germans had come in, they had taken Togo, they had taken Cameroon, they had taken Namibia, they had taken Tanganyika, and they were pushing. They wanted territory, they wanted recognition. And what we see is that the emperor or Kaiser of Germany, a fellow by the name of William II. Now he had an English name because he actually had an English mother. Queen Victoria was his aunt, and actually during World War One, he and the King of England, they were cousins. They actually maintained correspondence during the war because they were relatives. People tend to forget the British royal family originally comes from Hanover, Germany. And they did not actually get rid of the Hanover name until World War II. That's when they became the, oh gosh, what are they now? Windsors. That's when they decided to change their name to a more British sounding name. Because prior to that, they were the Hanoverians because they had been elected, they originally came from the family of the Elector of Hanover, a German state. But anyway, I'm getting off the track, so let me actually get back to Africa because that's what this class is about. Well, anyway, what we see is that William II